Something happens that can't be captured by reason alone. A person walks into the space and nothing dramatic occurs. There's no soundtrack playing, no spotlight shining down. Yet something deep inside him quietly shifts into place. Like hearing an ancient name he'd forgotten he once knew, he convinces himself its simple physical appeal. She's attractive, intriguing, or just unlike the people he typically pays attention to. He attributes it to her subtle grin, or how her gaze doesn't seem rushed to validate itself to the world. But underneath his awareness, a softer reality murmurs that he recognizes her from somewhere he's never actually visited. He's encountered countless individuals through apps, quick glances, brief flirtations, and passing moments. He understands what it means to want someone's physical presence, their narrative, or temporary escape. This feels separate from all that. It's like standing before a reflection, showing him parts of his inner self he was never permitted to discover. When her laughter fills the air, something locked inside his chest releases, as though someone has unsealed a closed chamber from the inside. When her attention finds him, his usual protective layers simply dissolve away. The rehearsed charm, the calculated emotional distance, the subtle manipulations that once shielded him suddenly seem flimsy and immature. He can't explain why honesty feels necessary around her, just that it does. In her company, he experiences an odd sense of déjà vu, as though they've already disagreed and made peace in some previous existence, as though somewhere in an invisible timeline ahead, they've already shared countless ordinary yet meaningful conversations at a kitchen counter while daylight disappeared outside. It lacks theatricality, but carries a calm recognition that disturbs him. A famous thinker once observed that when two distinct individuals meet, it resembles two chemicals making contact, and if there's a genuine reaction, both undergo transformation. He hasn't heard this wisdom directly, yet he senses its reality throughout his entire being, because something within him responds to her in ways that signal inevitable change. He observes how reality becomes sharper in her vicinity. The illumination against surfaces, how moments seem to both expand and contract around brief exchanges, the quiet gaps between her sentences. He grows intensely conscious of his own existence, not from self-doubt, but because his deepest self rises closer to visibility. On the surface, nothing extraordinary takes place. Two individuals occupy a space discussing employment, mutual acquaintances, or meaningless topics. But internally, his entire existence reorganizes itself to accommodate her. He fails to grasp that this is soul recognition. He simply knows that walking away from her feels incorrect, like abandoning an open book at its most captivating passage. His physical being holds a subtle yearning for her speech patterns, for the shape of her thinking, as though some internal compass had finally discovered the direction it was always designed to point toward. Eventually, he'll attempt to convince himself he's overreacting, that feeling this intensely, this quickly, is foolish. But a wiser part of him already understands he's not simply experiencing attraction. He's remembering something his deepest self has always understood before his conscious mind could comprehend it. The inner feminine he always carried. Before their paths crossed, he already held a feminine presence within himself. Not an actual person with features and identity, but a sense of the feminine, a subtle internal impression that surfaced in his sleeping visions, waking fantasies, and those peculiar instances when certain melodies made his chest hurt without explanation. During childhood, he experienced her as a softness existing beneath his toughness. The impulse to console rather than dominate, the tendency to safeguard fragile things, the requirement to sense the quietness in spaces before adding sound to them. He discovered quickly that society didn't understand this aspect of him, so he constructed protective layers. He mastered humor, challenges, and concealing his gentle nature behind quick wit. He selected rationality over instinct. He absorbed more from what other males expected than from the subtle voice within his chest. But this inner feminine dimension never vanished. She simply retreated into the background and remained patient. Occasionally she contacted him through the people he romantically pursued, through his attraction toward sensitivity, imagination, or enigma, through his captivation with gazes that seemed to penetrate his exterior. He believed he was simply following a pattern of preference. Actually, his deepest self was seeking a reflection. He attempted to transform every romantic interest into that internal impression. He placed his desires for gentleness, security, and emotional warmth onto their identities, and when they failed to align with this invisible expectation, he experienced confusion and letdown without understanding the source. He wasn't genuinely upset with them, but with the gap between his internal landscape and external reality. The psychologist described this inner feminine as a connection point. She represents the aspect of masculinity that links him to his emotional life, his instincts, and depths that pure logic cannot access. When he respects her, he becomes more whole. When he dismisses her, she transforms into irritability, bitterness, or fixation whose origin he cannot identify. For years he traveled this bridge in dreams, but seldom in conscious life. Frequently he would emerge from intense dreams, featuring someone whose features he couldn't fully recall, moisture in his eyes, and an unexplainable longing throughout his chest. By morning he had dismissed it and considered it meaningless. Yet the inner feminine continued orchestrating small moments, a movie that broke him open, music that rendered him speechless, an unfamiliar person on public transport whose simple existence affected him. Each moment served as a subtle practice session for when his soul would witness its reflection in complete daylight. When he encounters you, the hidden and the visible finally meet. The sensation he's held since youth stands before him in footwear, flesh, and vision that contains both tempest and brightness. The connection that previously existed solely in his unconscious now possesses living shape. He lacks vocabulary for it. He simply knows you communicate in a language his heart has understood for years, though his voice never acquired it. You evoke every aspiration he's had about being more genuine, caring, and present. That's why his response to you feels bigger than the actual moment. Your existence reaches that location where his inner femininity has waited for acknowledgement and respect. In you, he doesn't simply observe another person. He meets his own soul at the water's boundary and understands that the image gazing back is simultaneously himself, the quality of his attention. Initially, you might not even detect how the atmosphere transforms when his focus turns toward you. You assume he's just another person who pays attention, offering a courteous expression and acknowledgement at appropriate times. Yet when you communicate, you perceive something unusual. You sense his awareness moving toward you, as though your language weren't merely vibrations, but fragments of a guide he's been seeking forever. He retains details you've personally forgotten long ago. How your coffee tastes different when exhaustion sets in versus when optimism fills you. The narrative you shared once about literature that brought comfort during isolated childhood. Weeks pass, and he brings it up gently, and you're astonished that anyone absorbed it deeply enough to hold it. When you speak, he doesn't browse his device. His vision doesn't drift toward exits. His focus remains steady on you, not demanding, not controlling, but peaceful, alert, profoundly engaged. He absorbs even your light-hearted remarks with a gentleness that continues after the amusement subsides. He doesn't simply react to the humor. He preserves how your mouth shapes itself around playfulness, the brief flash of brightness in your vision. He collects these elements like someone who's finally discovered a language he wishes to master. His inquiries differ too. He doesn't simply ask about your activities, but about their impact on your inner being. He wants to understand what prevents your sleep and what type of quietness you require to feel protected. When you respond, he absorbs with his entire presence, as though the space has condensed to the distance between your voice and his pulse. You observe that he frequently becomes silent in your vicinity. Not the quietness of disinterest, but the profound stillness of someone unwilling to miss anything. He creates pauses between language and doesn't hurry to occupy them. Within those pauses, you both sense something invisible, a strand weaving between your internal worlds. Eventually, you understand he perceives your inner climate. He senses when your expression holds genuine joy versus when it's merely a veil before a weary soul. He detects when your written words sound more hollow and contacts you without criticism, without pressure, as though some internal sensor within him had calibrated itself precisely to you. This type of focus feels like standing in gentle sunlight after extended time in a cold space. One part of you softens, desires to inhale, to expand, to be completely witnessed. Another part experiences alarm. You're unaccustomed to being observed so carefully without someone attempting to alter or dominate you. He's imperfect. He overlooks things. He occasionally gets consumed by his own internal turbulence. Yet within his company exists something like sanctuary. When he's genuinely present, you sense that your thinking isn't a burden, but a flowing waterway along whose edges he sits with appreciation. Actually, he doesn't simply absorb your words. He hears the reflection of his own soul through your expression. The scholar said, "We never genuinely encounter as unknowns, but always as aspects of ourselves mirrored in another's perception." When he recognizes you, something within him grasps that your language carries messages from his own soul. That's why his focus feels holy. It's not manipulation, not technique. It's the tendency of someone who perceives that, by genuinely witnessing you, he's returning to a long-neglected chamber in his own heart. So he watches. He preserves. At night, he revisits your sentences in thought. Not from fixation, but because through you, he discovers how to respect himself. When his defenses begin to fall, throughout his existence, he's relied on his protective mechanisms more than his emotional truth, appeal, mockery, the capacity to redirect conversation when pain approached too closely. Those protections served as his faithful guardians at the entrance to his heart. Then he encounters you, and those sentries begin exchanging uncertain glances, as though questioning whether they should withdraw. He discovers himself revealing things he never planned to disclose, about the parent he still seeks to satisfy mentally, about the separation that wounded him far deeper than he acknowledged. Initially, the language emerges haltingly, then more openly, as though it had awaited this evening, this receiver. Afterward, he feels vulnerable. He mentally repeats the exchange, experiencing shame. Why did I reveal that? Why did I permit her to witness that? The following morning, a small fear sits beneath his ribs, as though he'd departed home without protection. He attempts to reconstruct the barriers, communicates less, creates humor to maintain surface-level interaction, tells himself he must decelerate to restore command. But as he creates distance, he experiences a tension in his chest that persists. Because near you, separation feels dishonest. His body recalls what expressing freely felt like, the ease in his frame, the illumination behind his vision. He understands that his amusement with you originates from a deeper place, not the social laughter he employs in spaces where he trusts nobody. You pose straightforward questions, yet they access complex territories within him. How are you genuinely? How did that experience affect you then? Your interest isn't invasive, but it's tender and consistent, and it creates difficulty for him to shelter behind partial responses. Sometimes his voice wavers when he answers. Sometimes he cannot respond whatsoever and simply looks elsewhere because the reality is too exposed. You might believe you said something incorrect. You didn't. You're simply positioned at the threshold of an entrance he's never permitted anyone to unlock. The writer explained that one doesn't achieve enlightenment by visualizing illuminated figures, but by bringing the darkness into awareness. He doesn't know that statement, but he experiences it through caring for you. He senses his own darkness stirring, requesting to be witnessed. It frightens and liberates him simultaneously. He might express that he struggles with vulnerability, that he's complex, and that emotions perplex him. Actually, he means that you disarmed him so rapidly his former techniques no longer function. He stands unshielded before a reflection, showing him the young person he once was and the individual he still aspires to become. When he withdraws, it doesn't always indicate he doesn't desire you. Frequently it indicates he desires you excessively, that your perception touches locations he's long evaded. In you, his soul witnesses an opportunity for authenticity. In you, it emerges from behind the barrier and quietly inquires whether honesty is now possible. His protections tremble, not because you assaulted them, but because they perceive they're no longer required near you. He experiences a new form of safety, one established not on command, but on being witnessed. And once you've experienced that, returning to pretense becomes difficult. The dance between light and shadow between you develops a particular intensity. In one instance, he's completely present, his vision, his voice, his physical being warm and accessible, as though nothing else exists. The next, he appears distant, seeking language that previously flowed easily. It's as though he's positioned in a threshold, uncertain whether to enter or escape. When you permit him to be witnessed, something within him starts to radiate. He senses more vitality, more imagination, more bravery. He discusses concepts long hidden and acknowledges he desired more from existence than the secure route he selected. In your company, his courage extends like a creature waking after prolonged hibernation, but the illumination that stirs his aspirations also reveals his anxieties. The nearer he approaches you, the more intense the ancient voices become. You will lose her. You're insufficient. You'll destroy everything once more. The murmurs originate from injuries he was never genuinely permitted to experience. That's why he oscillates between nearness and retreat. He might abruptly withdraw, then genuinely express regret. He becomes quiet when circumstances are lovely and honest. That doesn't indicate your bond is superficial. It indicates it reaches the locations where affection and fear coexist. He can no longer display only his polished aspect. His possessiveness, which he believed he'd long mastered, re-emerges. His tendency to close down when wounded returns. His impulse to control what he doesn't comprehend flickers at the boundary of his kindness. You witness both the individual he takes pride in and the youth who still experiences pain. It's attractive to interpret his confusion as personal, to believe you've caused harm, but typically you're observing the collision between his desire for growth and his allegiance to former survival mechanisms. You've awakened his internal illumination, and with it the shadow that's been quietly awaiting recognition. The psychologist taught that the shadow holds not merely the darkness, but also the unexpressed, the potential within us. When someone encounters their shadow externally, they're confronted with everything they could become, and everything they still dread. You transform into a reflection not solely for his beauty, but also for his suppressed accountability, his concealed suffering, his unutilized tenderness. That's why he occasionally expresses that you overwhelm him even when you're gentle. Your simple existence presses against the boundaries of his familiar territory. You don't require that he be more. He simply senses it. In your company, greater possibilities seem achievable. And this understanding is for a heart habituated to its restrictions, both intoxicating and alarming. If you observe carefully, you'll witness his internal disorder isn't meaningless turbulence. It's the force removing ancient foliage because a new cycle is commencing. In you, he recognizes an invitation from existence to enter his complete magnitude, and his shadow understands nothing will remain unchanged again. The transformation of desire. One day, he'll understand that desiring you is no longer sufficient. The urge to captivate you starts to seem small compared to the profound wish to position himself beside you as a peer. His sentiments shift from the excitement of pursuit into the calm yearning to become someone who can genuinely share your journey with you. He starts to detect the aspects of his existence that no longer align with the individual he desires to be in your company. The method he evades challenging exchanges, the patterns through which he conceals from himself, the areas of his existence where he's existed half-conscious. Now these elements feel uncomfortable because he perceives that you would see through them instantly without uttering a syllable, so he starts to transform quietly. He composes the communication he's long postponed. He accepts accountability for how he concluded something in his history. Instead of assigning fault to others, he begins expressing truth more frequently, even where deception would be simpler. You witness him reassessing his relationships and patterns. Evenings previously occupied with distraction and emotional numbness now seem hollow. He pursues locations where he can experience his heart rather than those where he can shelter in commotion. It's as though your existence has amplified the intensity of his inner voice. He no longer solely asks what he desires from her. A more significant question emerges. Who does he become in her company? Nearness to you serves as a reflection, constantly inviting him to develop into his own authenticity. You observe that he's not fixated on your location, not because he lacks concern, but because a deeper respect for your internal world has established itself within him. He desires your agreement to be voluntary, so that if you select him, he can rely on the genuineness of that selection. In how he maintains your bond, there's gentleness. He doesn't force your heart. He doesn't discipline you when you require time. Instinctively, he grasps that anything he attempts to compel could demolish precisely what renders your connection sacred. That doesn't indicate he's inactive. When circumstances warrant, he advances. He communicates what he experiences with an honesty that astonishes even him. He might falter over the language, but you sense they originate from a location that's long practiced authenticity in darkness. He starts to care not solely about how you perceive him, but also about how he perceives himself when he's with you. When he responds from anxiety, he senses it more intensely. When he selects kindness over selfishness, he rests more peacefully. Your existence transforms into a quiet guide, constantly directing him back to his own soul. And if you observe carefully, you'll witness he doesn't desire to claim your illumination. He permits himself to be instructed by it. The affection he experiences for you summons him into a much greater version of himself. And he responds gradually, not flawlessly, not without opposition, but with an authenticity that consistently returns, even when his uncertainties desire to withdraw him. She doesn't know her own light. She, meanwhile, has no concept of how profoundly she's witnessed. In her thinking, she's simply herself with all the common uncertainties and small self-doubts she carries like stones in her clothing. She witnesses in the reflection only fatigued skin, delicate marks around her vision, unmanageable hair. She doesn't witness how his soul releases breath when she enters the space. She convinces herself that people are frequently captivated temporarily and then proceed onward. That interest diminishes when she isn't consistently simple or accessible. When he observes her with his peaceful, steady perception, she assumes he'll ultimately grow disinterested. She doesn't comprehend that it's not her flawlessness that maintains him, but the distinctive form of her spirit. There are evenings when she remains wakeful and mentally repeats her errors like a harsh recording. The occasions she cared excessively remained too extended, remained quiet when she should have established limits. She believes these are justifications someone might depart her. But he witnesses in them the tender narrative that formed her into the person now positioned before him. Perhaps you identify yourself in her, in how she minimizes her gentleness, the type that causes unfamiliar people to feel protected, in how she mistrusts her instinct because it doesn't align with the definite logic the world celebrates. She doesn't understand that it's precisely this instinct that summons his internal world from concealment. The scholar frequently proposed that we don't simply develop affection for individuals, but for an impression of the soul that addresses what we ourselves desire to become. He isn't deluded by her, but awakened through her, because something in how she experiences and understands responds to an inquiry he had held in darkness for extended time. And yet, she questions whether she's sufficient. She fears that the enchantment will diminish once he genuinely knows her. She believes she must be more knowledgeable, more composed, more assured to merit how he observes her. Actually, it's her genuine becoming that affects him, not a perfected iteration of herself. He detects how she concerns herself with small elements others disregard, how she hesitates before communicating when she perceives someone's fragility, how her amusement returns after a difficult day, like a quiet demonstration of resistance against hopelessness. To him, these aren't insignificant details, but sacred evidence of the illumination she maintains within her. She's habituated to carrying her heart independently. When he recalls her narratives and reflects her strength, she desires to dismiss it. "You're exaggerating," she expresses, but he isn't. He simply describes what his internal world recognized in her from the initial instant, what she doesn't yet comprehend. She's not simply a person he desires. She's a representation in his soul, a living response to his concealed yearning for depth, authenticity, and tenderness. He cannot precisely explain why her existence transforms him. He simply knows that near her he senses more genuine, more wakeful, and somehow more himself. The invitation to your own recognition. Perhaps as you absorbed this, you considered someone, an individual whose perception held you in that peculiarly familiar manner. A bond that seemed too profound for the brief duration you knew one another. Or perhaps you experienced the discomfort of never having encountered something resembling that. Regardless, this narrative desired to communicate something to you. You're not simply someone who can be selected or disregarded. You're also the one who perceives. Your soul interprets the world constantly, even when your thinking labels it fantasy. Consider the instances when you experience that mysterious attraction towards someone, the occasions when your physical being relaxed before your brain granted authorization, the connections that commenced with a simple exchange and departed you with a sensation of being recognized. These aren't random occurrences, they're communications from the deeper dimensions of your existence. The psychologist discussed the inner feminine and inner masculine as forces that exist within every individual. The soul's feminine and masculine aspects dwell in you too. They preserve a secret relationship behind your thinking and choices. When you sense drawn to someone, it's frequently these inner figures seeking acknowledgement. They extend outward for reflections in which they can develop. When someone observes you with that ancient gentleness in their perception, something in you stirs too. You're not solely witnessed, you witness. You sense your own inner masculine advance, curious about the reflection that existence is displaying to you. You encounter yourself in their response. That indicates whether they remain or depart. You're already in contact with something sacred. The recognition was never solely romantic. It was your soul displaying its own depth through how your heart responded. Nobody can remove that from you. You've traveled through so many spaces where you experienced excessive or insufficient. Locations where your sensitivity was perceived as fragility and your instinct as overstatement. Yet it's precisely these characteristics that render you visible to the type of affection that can genuinely witness. Not everyone is designed to recognize you, but those who can will sense it throughout their entire being. As you advance, permit this understanding to transform how you carry yourself. You don't require to pursue focus that doesn't genuinely contact you. You don't require to diminish your authenticity so others can be comfortable. You may await bonds that communicate the language of your soul. Pay focus to who you become in the company of those who matter to you. Detect when your voice sounds more liberated, your physical being feels more protected, your amusement rises from the depth of your heart, instead of from the facade you've acquired to display. These are indicators that something genuine is recognizing you. If something in this narrative reached the aspect of you that's exhausted of incomplete affection, then pause for an instant in this reality. Permit it to soften how you evaluate your history and how you fear your future. You're not delayed. You're expanding at the rhythm your soul can sustain. And if these language patterns affected you, distribute them with the person who still questions her own illumination. Preserve them for evenings when you forget what you merit. Remain near to locations that remind you of the depth you hold within. If your heart desires more narratives resembling this, then pursue that desire not from impulse, but as a quiet commitment to continue absorbing.